Well, this parable leaves people baffled quite often, thinking, what is going on here? In the story, how can the rich bloke commend the dishonest manager for the outcome at the end? It's like, what? Shouldn't he go to jail? Shouldn't he get smacked around a bit at least? Why does Jesus then go on to say we should go harder than the manager in our use of money? In a similar way, it's like, what? But while the society in which Jesus lived shared some of our concerns about justice, they had a much greater emphasis on honour and shame. You know, you and I might be shamed out or paid out over something embarrassing that happens to us, especially, you know, when you're in high school. It's like, oh, I just want to die or disappear. This is so embarrassing. And no one wants to become an internet meme, do they? Or no one wants to become a whipping boy on the nightly news. But still, we don't experience honour and shame like the people of Jesus' day, or as they do in many cultures still to this day around the world. Apparently, societies in the New Testament times, for them, honour was just as important as wealth, if not more so, when it came to a man's social status. Honour for a male head of household, like the rich bloke in today's parable, was tied together with power. And that meant their ability to exercise control over the people around them and their behaviour. So in the logic of the story, it would be assumed that the manager only did as his master instructed him to do. So the manager would look like a real dill, completely useless and ineffective. We would call this stuff today the misappropriation of funds or corruption. You know, having your hand in the till for the benefit of yourself and your mates. And we know that there's plenty of politicians who've been pretty good at that, and people in business with too much money and not enough care. And it's probably similar to the squandering of the prodigal son in that parable we heard from last week. You know, the son who said, "Dad, I wish you were dead, give me my cut of the inheritance," and then went off and blew it all in partying and prostitutes. So in today's story, when the manager did this, the man on the street would think that the rich bloke had no control over him, or worse, that he had no business brains, and dumbly ordered the manager to do what he did. So in an attempt to save face and restore honour to himself, he calls him in and says, "Mate, you got the sack. You're out of here." So the manager faces a crisis. What's he going to do? No one will hire him because he's made the boss look really bad in the eyes of the public. He has dishonoured him, and now it's like, well, no one's going to hire me. I'm not a ditch digger. Let's face it, I like my air-conditioned office with my computer and my 3 meals a day. I don't want to be out there on the end of a crowbar. And he knows that he doesn't want to sit on the footpath begging on the cold concrete. He wants to be welcomed into people's homes as a manager with all the perks. But it looks unlikely. However, like the prodigal son, he cooks up a cunning plan to ensure that it works out the way he wants. So he calls in his boss's debtors and offers them extraordinarily generous discounts on their debts. By the amounts involved in the loans, we know it was enough to pay for a 450-tree olive orchard, and enough to buy the yield of 100 acres of wheat. So the rich man is obviously very rich, maybe even by today's standards. So in forgiving large portions of these debts, the manager is actually making his boss look like a total legend in the eyes of his peers and in the public, and thus restoring his honour, which is the most important thing in their world. And so the manager secures the possibility not only for future employment, because the word will get around that he is a manager that brings honour to his boss, but he'll also look good himself. And he no doubt won a few friends along the way with those bills that he slashed. So he's engineered for himself out of a no-win situation, a win-win situation. He cannot lose. That's why the rich man at the end of the story commends him for the shrewdness, the cunning of his actions. And that's why Jesus then goes on to spell out bluntly that the godless people of this age are way better at using this problematic stuff called money to win friends and influence people than are the children of God. He reckons the godless are way better at doing that stuff than the God-fearing. Now remember, Jesus was talking directly to his disciples, but the Pharisees and the scribes are also overhearing the conversation, and there's still tax collectors and sinners hanging around. Most of this crowd had a problem with money in one way or the other. So Jesus cuts them off with nowhere to escape. You cannot serve God and wealth. Or in the old school lingo, you cannot serve God and mammon. For those of you who remember the older translations. Interestingly, it's not the disciples or the tax collectors and sinners that freak out at what Jesus says, but the Pharisees, the people who are supposed to be the spiritual leaders of their day, the ones leading spiritual renewal in the life of the nation, because they have this sordid love affair with money. They've been unfaithful with it. They've been unfaithful also with the true riches that God has entrusted them in the way that they use their knowledge of the Bible for their own ends. They put others down and put them in their place so they can lord it over them. And they distort the kingdom movement of Jesus by the ways in which they tear him down with their words and their schemes. And it may seem like an odd thing tacked on the end there about divorce, but never forget that in Jesus' day, men had total rights and women had none. So men married and divorced as they pleased and chucked women away like they were consumer goods. So he was putting the onus back on them. He's saying, you guys who are supposed to be the spiritual leaders of this nation, you're as unfaithful in your marriages as anybody else. Tidy up your act. Because as women, you're hurting. And it reflects badly on God. So what do we do with all this, since you and I don't necessarily have as much truck with honour and shame? I think Bishop Tom Wright summed it up best in his commentary when he says, the key to all this is faithfulness. Money is not a possession that we own, it's a trust. God entrusts property to people and expects it to be used to his glory and for the welfare of all of his children. It's not for private glory and glamour. Money also, according to this passage, points beyond itself to the true riches which await us in the life to come. What they are, we can hardly guess. But there are true riches which really will belong to us in a way that money doesn't, if we learn faithfulness here and now. So the question is, how are we going to use our money? Are we going to buy everything we ever want and ever need with it and then forget about everyone else, using it completely selfishly? Because remember, there's no tow bar on a hearse. You can't take it with you. How are we going to use our money to bring honour to our dad in heaven? Really encourages me, and it probably is going over the same point again and again, but it really encourages me how I rocked up to find that this congregation was determined to use this building that God has given us and trusted us to bless this community, and willing to share it at low cost or no cost to others, so that people in this town may be built up, may be rescued, and may be made whole. Well done. And I love the fact that we have our annual garage sale where the money that we take in goes straight out the door. And much of it every year is spent in this local community, again, to build people up and to make them whole. And doing things in this way brings honour to our Dad in heaven. And I also think of our time in Kerrang, where the Christmas carols in the community had fallen by the wayside for many years, and it was just a minimum presentation, and people were exhausted, and the churches decided to band together and put their money where their mouth was, and we spent several $1,000s on fireworks, and some people question whether that was a good thing to do, but I tell you what, it got the attention of the entire district, because they were the first fireworks provided by anyone in 20 years, and only the council had done it before. And here were the churches stumping up for a community-wide celebration. We held that in the school that no one wanted to send their kids to, so that they would be built up as well and have some encouragement. And we could draw attention to the great work of the staff in that place and their calibre. And amongst it all, we got to proclaim the good news of Jesus and sing his praises. That seems to me to be a way that you take all the things that God has trusted you with and you spend that worldly wealth to bring honour to God's name. There are many other examples that you probably can think of. A waste to some people, but an important use of resources for the kingdom. How might we act individually to use our money to bring honour to God and not to ourselves? And how might we use our knowledge and experience of God to bring honour to him? Or will we use it to make ourselves look clever, look like the smartest person in the room? Will we use it to make ourselves look superior by loading burdens on other people like the Pharisees did, while we're unfaithful in our own relationships? We know from the news that there's too many Christian ministers who have done just that to this day. And it's done nothing but dishonour our Dad in heaven. But let's face it, most of us won't do that and be placed in that situation, but many of us are tempted to use our knowledge about God to make ourselves feel superior to others in our righteousness, while we look down on others and think, well, how far from God are they, or how wrongly are they behaving, when they're the people that God wants us to spend time with. How will we use our relationships, our interactions with others as an opportunity to bring honour to our Dad? In the end, how will we use our time, that most precious gift that is running out? Think about how Jesus himself lived. Everything he does it to bring honour to his Dad in heaven. What his Dad in heaven prizes, he prizes. And that looks very different to human expectations. Remember, the Pharisees and the scribes were horrified by the people that Jesus would hang out, touch, hug, heal, and eat with. But he knew where his Dad's priorities were. He shares his knowledge with the unschooled, with the ignorant, with the lawless, the people weighed down with the sorrows and burdens of this life, not to make it harder for them or to make them feel guilty or useless or stuck. He teaches them so that they'll be free. And Jesus spends his money, and remember, he did have a fair bit of money available as a resource through the various supporters he had. He used all his money to work full-time for 3 whole years, knowing that once he went public with his ministry, it would be counting down to the day of his death. How's that for being faithful? In the end, he gave up the most valuable thing he had been given by God, his life, to honour God with his last breath. Not with venom, but to pray, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And this honour is returned by his Father on the dawn of the 3rd day, when he rose victoriously from the grave, so that you and I could sit here tonight. This Jesus says to us tonight, Honour my dad's name. I've given you this day your daily bread. I've delivered you from evil. I've forgiven you your debts. So be faithful with the very little that I've given you, and I will trust you with true riches. Amen.